organisms dying, going to the bottom of the water column, getting buried, producing oil. But it's the same situation. You have some kind of organic organism dies and then is degraded, and thiophenes are produced. You also get these thiophenes on Earth in organisms that are alive today. So white truffles is an example. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that there are any white truffles in Gale Crater. And I'm not suggesting that these thiophenes in Gale Crater are even a product of biological activity. They don't have to be produced by organisms. It's just that on Earth, because there is so much life everywhere, this is where we normally see them, is as a product of biology. They can be produced abiologically. The problem is, again, the Curiosity rover can't tell us whether they're produced abiologically or whether they're produced by microbes. All it can tell us is that they're there and that they're present in a certain abundance. We need really to bring these samples back to Earth, to analyze them further, to do the type of analysis that can't be done by the rover, that you need, the big instruments and the big power sources to analyze. So Mars sample return by the Perseverance rover will be excellent, but there are actually Martian samples already present on Earth in the form of meteorites. Now, meteorites are kind of a random selection of any planet. So if we get meteorites from Mars, we don't get to choose where they come from. We don't even know where they come from on the surface of Mars. So we can't say this meteorite came from this place, this meteorite came from Gale Crater, or this meteorite came from the Hallis Basin on Mars. We don't know any information like that. All we know is that they are from Mars, and we can study their chemistry. And that can tell us a lot about the geology and the chemistry of Mars, of the Martian environment. There are organic molecules present in these meteorites, but the problem is all of the meteorites that we have, they're not these nice mudstones or sandstones that we get at Gale Crater. They are basalts, which is essentially a lava. So most of Mars is very boring geologically compared to Earth, which has lots and lots of different rock types and lots of different types of habitats that produce sediments and lots of different minerals and rocks. Mars is very boring. The vast majority of it is just volcanoes that produce lava and lava flows. And so these produce basaltic rocks, which are crystalline rocks. So the type of rock that you would pick up, say, in Hawaii. They have nice crystals in them, but they don't have any, they're not formed from sediments. They're not formed in a habitable environment. They're formed in a volcano. So while they do contain organic molecules, the abundance of the organics within these meteorites is very, very low. So this, if I just play this small video, is a video that one of my PhD students made of a small organic rich inclusion within one of the Martian meteorites that we have at Glasgow. So this dark sort of sludgy speckly thing is largely made up of a sort of tarry substance, kind of like kerogen or road tar that you would put, tarmac is what it is really. It's a very small inclusion that is, less than the width of a human hair. The meteorites are filled with these tiny inclusions, but because they're so small, it means that the overall percentage of organics within the rocks is really, really small. But what we can do is we can use instruments and laboratories here on Earth to analyze these meteorites and see how they compare to the organics that were detected at Gale Crater. So that is what my current research is focused on. So we have different groups of Martian meteorites, and they range in age between 4.1 billion years old to 180 million years old. Now that age distinction is really important because the oldest meteorite at 4.1 billion years old is within the sort of early warm and wet Martian environment, when we think maybe there was a northern ocean, when we know that the atmosphere of Mars was much thicker than it is today. So when Mars was potentially much more habitable than it is at the present day. So there's one meteorite that we know of that was formed at the Martian surface during this time. Most of the meteorites, however, were formed much later during this orange Amazonian period on the timeline, when we know that Mars was colder, was drier at the surface. So all of those nice riverbeds and lakes had dried out. There was definitely no northern ocean anymore, and the atmosphere was much thinner. So potentially most of the meteorites that we have were formed in this kind of less habitable time of Mars's history. As I said, the majority of them are lava rocks that form from volcanoes. Some of them were seen to fall, which is important because Martian meteorites get to us by something hits Mars. A lot of material is blasted from the crust of Mars, and some of it escapes the Martian atmosphere. A small amount of it is directed towards Earth and then survives Earth entry and lands on the surface of Earth. And we see those as sort of shooting stars. Now, some of these Martian meteorites were seen to fall through Earth's atmosphere and were collected almost immediately. That's really good if we want to study the organic content of those rocks, because obviously if the meteorite is left for thousands of years sitting on the Earth's surface, any sort of microbes or organic molecules that will be present in it are probably going to be contamination from the Earth environment that it's been sitting in. You know, maybe it was sat in mud, maybe it was sat in a jungle somewhere. It's going to get really contaminated. So the ones that were seen to fall and were picked up by somebody immediately are the really important ones in terms of looking at organic content. There have been some that were found in desert environments where people have deliberately gone to collect or gone meteorite hunting, as we call it, in Antarctica and dry places such as the North African desert. And those are great because it's quite dry there, so they don't get rained on too much. They won't get too weathered. But in terms of the organic content, we really want to look at the really fresh ones that were seen to fall. So how do we know a Martian meteorite is from Mars? Now, there are many different groups of meteorites. The green ones here are the asteroidal meteorites, and I just wanted to point them out because if any of you were watching the news in March, you will have seen that a meteorite fell over the UK in Gloucester in a place called Winchcombe. And the team here at Glasgow immediately rushed down, and I never thought that we would find any, but we actually found lots and lots of meteorite. And as it turns out, it was one of these chondrite meteorites that come from an asteroid, very rich in organic molecules and very fresh because it was immediately picked up. So just as an aside, we've got lots of that. We're analysing it at the moment, and that was very exciting. But it wasn't Martian, unfortunately. I had my fingers crossed that it was going to be Martian, but it wasn't. It was an asteroidal sample. So they are very common. All of those green meteorites there, they're the most common meteorites that you get because they're from asteroids, and there are lots and lots of asteroids in the solar system. Those meteorites land to Earth all the time, but they also land on Mars all the time. Then we've got these blue meteorites, which is everything else. So anything that's ever been involved in a large planetary body. So we've got the Martian meteorites identified. We've got lunar meteorites identified. We know that those are from Mars and that lunar meteorites are from the moon. There are other groups in here that we know were part of a planet, but the planet has never been identified. And that's because these planets don't exist anymore. So in the early solar system, there were probably hundreds of rocky planets similar to Mars, similar to Earth, but not all of them survived because they all hit into each other and kind of, you know, Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars are the 4 rocky planet survivors of that really chaotic early period in time. So all we have is fragments that are left from these meteorites. We can group them together, but we're never going to identify the planetary body they came from because it doesn't exist anymore. But the Martian meteorites we can group together and we know they're from Mars. So how do we know they're from Mars? In my opinion, this is one of the coolest bits of science ever done. But I am biased because I'm a planetary scientist. So in 1975, as I mentioned, there was the first successful landers. The NASA Viking landers landed on the surface of Mars. And one of the experiments that they were due to do is to test the composition of the Martian atmosphere. So they sent that data back to Earth. And somebody had the bright idea of, oh, you know, we've got this group of rocks that we know are, in terms of the minerals that are in there, in terms of their ages, are all grouped together, but we don't know where they came from. Maybe they could be from Mars. And somebody had the genius idea of cracking open one of the small bubbles that are present inside these lavas. So as a lava crystallizes, sometimes it captures a bit of gas from the atmosphere of whichever planetary body it's erupting onto. And they popped open one of these sort of encapsulated bits of gas, and they tested the composition of the gas inside the rock. And they found that it was the same as that given by the Viking lander as the composition of the Martian atmosphere. So in that way, they were able to link these meteorites with the Martian planets. So that's how we know that Martian meteorites are actually from Mars. As I said, there are various different groups. And for our analysis, we decided that we were going to look at 2 of the Knocklite meteorites. So these are very fresh meteorites. They are not terrestrially contaminated. They are from this sort of young Amazonian dry period of Martian history, but they do contain evidence of small amounts of flowing liquid water present within these lava flows on the surface of Earth after they erupted. So potentially they were from an environment that did have a small amount of liquid water. So this kind of gave me hope that we would be able to find evidence for lots of organic molecules within these 2 meteorites that were called Knockler and Lafayette. Now, this is where I got a student to do all the hard work. So my student Anya spent a very long time having to process these meteorites. We get given a very, very small amount of meteorite to analyze because our analysis involves basically crushing the meteorite up with a small pestle and mortar, powdering it, and then using various solvents to extract the organic molecules within there. Then we freeze down the extracts and we analyze them with a instrument in Glasgow, which is called a liquid chromatography mass spectrometer. Now, this is a similar method to the method that Mars Curiosity rover used on the surface of Mars to analyze those mudstones at Gale crater. The difference is that it's actually can identify much lower abundances of organics than the instrument that's present on the Curiosity rover. So liquid chromatography mass spectrometry is normally actually used for forensic analysis of, tiny little blood spatters, that kind of thing, really, really low amounts of organics. And it will give you every single molecule that is present in the sample that you are analyzing. And it will tell you the abundance of that molecule as well. So that's what we wanted because we knew there wouldn't be very much organics present in these Martian meteorites. So this is our data, and initially, this looks really complicated, but actually this plot is pretty simple to read. So anything that's in that blue circle that says all of the samples, those are all of our blanks from the lab. So that's testing that we've not got any contamination in the samples. And we tested some terrestrial basalts from Earth as well, from the Svalbard Islands, just to compare terrestrial lavas with Martian lavas. And what we wanted to see on this plot was that all of those Earth samples were separate from our Martian samples. So from Knockler, which is circled in orange there, and from Lafayette, which is circled in purple. And that's what we got. There's a clear separation there between all the Earth samples, which cluster together, and those 2 Martian samples. Now, Knockler and Lafayette are both from the Knocklite group of Martian meteorites. They both came from the same site on Mars. They're the same age, and they were blasted from the surface of Mars at the same time. And what we were expecting is that they would plot on top of each other because they're from the same place on the same planet, the same lava flow sequence. But they plot way away from each other. And this is something we really, really didn't expect. We expected them to be different to the terrestrial organic compounds. So we were expecting to see, Martian organics are different to Earth organics. But what we didn't expect to see is that Lafayette organics are different from Knockler organics. To me, initially, I was very surprised with this. This kind of didn't make much sense. So what molecules did we find within Knockler and Lafayette? Well, we did find sulfur-bearing organics. That's similar to those thiothenes that were found at the Gale crater. This is an example. Pentanous sulfonate was detected in Lafayette. And this zigzag sort of chain just shows the carbon chain, hydrocarbon, and it's got this functional group with a sulfur and some oxygen on the end of the molecule there. We also found lots of fatty acids and lipids, which are typically on Earth the kind of thing that you find making up cell walls in a microbial cell. These are found in other meteorites, in carbonaceous chondrite meteorites, like the Winchcombe meteorite that was found in the UK recently. And they're very common in these carbonaceous chondrites. They've not really been reported on Mars before. And so this was kind of like, okay, well, maybe this is, pointing us towards a source for Martian carbon that is more asteroidal meteorites hitting the surface of Mars and then being incorporated into these lava flows. But we're not certain about that. So this is just an unpronounceable example of a fatty acid that we also detected in Lafayette. Generally, they're quite long chain molecules. So in terms of determining whether the source of Martian organic molecules is the Martian subsurface, so whether those organics come up with the lava from a magma chamber that's deep inside the Martian crust or in the Martian mantle, or whether the organics are delivered from asteroidal, carbonaceous chondrite type meteorites from asteroids to the surface of Mars and then incorporated into lava flows that made up the narcolite meteorites. We're not certain at the moment. I can't say. We need more data. But what I would like to focus on is what I just mentioned, is why is Nokla so different from Lafayette? Because this took us down a very unexpected rabbit hole. So this was a very surprising plot. And as you can see, Nokla and Lafayette are very separated here. So they have very different organic compounds. Now, Lafayette, Nokla was seen to fall in Egypt in 1911 and was collected very soon after it fell. So it has a very clear fall history. Someone saw it fall, someone picked it up. It was given to the Natural History Museum in London. Lafayette is uncertain. So this bottom right image shows Lafayette, the outside of Lafayette, and you can see it looks really glassy and it has these lovely flow lines on it. And that's typical of a very fresh meteorite where you can see what's called the fusion crust, which is this black glassy exterior. Now, if a meteorite has been sat around on Earth for any amount of time, that sort of black outer layer disappears and you start to see rusty spots, and then eventually the interior of the meteorite will be cracked and broken open. So Lafayette looks very fresh. Now, there is a story that it fell in a place called Lafayette in Indiana, and it was definitely found in a drawer at Purdue University, which is in Lafayette in Indiana, and recognized as a meteorite in 1931. But what's not known is where it came from before it was put into that drawer. There's a story that there was a Black student at the University of Purdue who saw the meteorite fall as he was fishing, and it fell in the lake. He fished it out of the lake, he took it home, and eventually he donated it to Purdue University. But unfortunately, the student has never been identified because we weren't sure of when it fell, what year before 1931 this meteorite fell. The member of staff that he told and gave the meteorite to died. And the person who published this paper that's on the left-hand side, which was published in 1931, Nininger never met either the student or the member of staff. I think it was hearsay at this point that this is where this meteorite came from. So this is a good story, but it's not corroborated. The year that it fell is unknown. The student that this story came from was never found, but it does look very fresh. So I'm telling you this because the molecules that we found in the Lafayette meteorite, by far the most abundant organic molecule we found in this meteorite was something called vomitoxin. Now, immediately this jumped out at myself and my student because normally complex molecules like this do not have a name. They are numbered and they have a very long sort of nomenclature name in chemistry. They don't have a nice short name like this. They only have a name if it's a known molecule that has been studied and that is known to form in some way. So that name jumped out at us, and we did a bit of digging during lockdown when we had nothing to do, and we found out that vomitoxin is produced by a disease that affects wheat. It's a fungal disease known as whitehead scab, and it really causes wheat crops to fail. So it's a very studied molecule. This also means that it's very likely that this is a terrestrial contaminant from the place that Lafayette fell. So this gave us a clue as to trying to figure out where the fall site for Lafayette is. Where is this vomitoxin, this whitehead scab molecule, prevalent in the world? So what we know is that whitehead scab is produced in warm and wet spring times, when there's been lots of rain before the wheat flowers and as it flowers, on irrigated farmland rather than rain-watered farmland, and where wheat is planted the year after wheat has been planted or corn has been planted. So we're looking at an irrigated, arable, permanently arable farmland in a warm, wet climate. Now, Lafayette is in Indiana in Central America, which is a very arable state. And near Lafayette itself is Tipico County, which is an area of 1,303 kilometers squared. Now, on doing a bit of research, one of the first websites we found was actually a website from Indiana. There's a whole institute dedicated to this whitehead scab because it's so prevalent in Indiana that crops fail and it makes livestock sick, which we think is why it's called vomitoxin, because it makes livestock vomit. So it poisons livestock. So they really keep track and have kept track of outbreaks of this disease since the 19th century. So Purdue University was founded in 1869. So that gives us a 62-year window in the Indiana region where we can say, okay, we think the whitehead scab vomitoxin is present in Lafayette, which shows that it fell in an area where there's lots of whitehead scab. We know this is prevalent in Indiana. We know that Purdue University was founded in 1869. So there's 62 years between then and 1931. So I tried to track down years when vomitoxin, when whitehead scab was very prevalent, and does that coincide with years when there were Black students at Purdue University graduating? So it's a complicated detective story. I just put that picture in because I find it funny that it makes pigs vomit, and that's why it's called vomitoxin. So apparently 1919 was the year for whitehead scab in the Tipico County region, where it was very, very prevalent. So that seems like a very likely fall year. And at the moment, what we're trying to do is track down whether there was a Black student that graduated or that was present at Purdue University in and around 1919. Now, that may seem like a difficult job, but actually it's not difficult at all, because between the founding of the university in 1869 and 1931, there were only 3 Black students that graduated from Purdue University. All 3 of them were present during that time, during 1919, and could have graduated during that time. So the search continues as to who done it, which one of those 3 students was potentially the person that saw Lafayette fall and can corroborate the story. And we're currently trying to get some more information about those students and potentially get in touch with relatives to see if, Grandad ever talked about seeing a meteorite fall. But we're very happy that we've kind of tracked down and potentially corroborated and figured out the story of how Lafayette kind of came to be in this draw at Purdue University. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna stop, and I hopefully there are time for some questions.
Thanks so much, Lydia. I absolutely love that, almost like a whodunit.
Yeah.
It's such a really interesting way to trace back a sample through time, and I guess reinforces the importance of good sample collection and recording, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think whoever was the curator that just put that sample in a drawer, I think they thought it was a glacial rock and was unimportant. And it does make me wonder whether, if the student had been a white student, would they have paid more attention to the story, because this is 1931. I think maybe the fact that it was a Black student, they just thought, well, you don't know what you're talking about, if it had been a white student, would it have been different?
I wonder
But
how many meteorite samples are languishing in drawers because they weren't correctly identified at the time.
I suspect there are lots of meteorites in drawers in ancient museums just sitting there waiting to be rediscovered.
It makes me think, I mean, you spoke about the Winchcombe meteorite, and at the time, the Geological Society was actually contacted by so many people who were in the area and wanted to know if they could go out looking for a meteorite, and if so, what to do when they collected one. And I thought maybe I'd start by asking you, what should someone do if they think they've found a meteorite sample, and how can they make sure that you guys, the scientists, can use it in your science?
Yes. So Winchcombe was a really difficult collection because it was obviously during lockdown and people were not allowed to travel. So we actually had to get special permission from the university, from the VIPs at the university, to even travel down there to go and have a look ourselves. And what we didn't want is for, people from all over the country to suddenly descend on this, what is a really small rural town, and potentially bring COVID into the area. So we kind of discouraged anybody from doing that at the time. Now things have opened up a bit more, feel free, go out there. What people shouldn't do is use a metal detector, because it is a very easy way of finding certain types of meteorites. But what you do when you put a metal detector near a meteorite is you kind of erase some of the data that is scientifically important. Because we look at the magnetic signals from meteorites, and that tells us all kinds of interesting stuff about the planet that it came from. And if somebody has had a big magnet near it, then that's kind of wiped that information away. What you will see normally is a black rock that looks like any other rock. So for us looking for Winchcombe, the person that found it on their driveway had seen my colleague Luke and Ashley from the Natural History Museum on the TV the night before, and they went out the next morning and they noticed this black pile of rock. And they'd luckily just been watching the news where Luke was saying, if you see a black pile of rock in that area, then it's not rubbish, please pick it up and put it in the bag. And they put it in a plastic bag, which meant that it was collected 12 hours after it landed. It landed on a driveway. There wasn't rain that night. So it's a completely pristine sample. So I'm really, really excited about that. We then went out and found lots and lots of other bits, but we basically did a police search where we combed the area, like you see a police lineup when they're looking for evidence in fields, and we were looking through a lot of sheep fields, and meteorites look very much like sheep poo. They're covered in a black glassy exterior, and they're the size of sheep poo. So we had a lot of false alarms, but eventually we found it a big bit. And it was actually Luke's girlfriend, who is not a scientist, who had pointed out probably 9 bits of poo earlier that day and said, "Is this a meteorite?" And we were like, "Oh no." And then she said, "Oh, I think this is one." And we were like, "Oh, okay." And then Luke was like, "Oh my God, it is." And we found a really, really big chunk that had those nice flow lines of fusion crust on it. And that's the piece that's currently on display at the Natural History Museum. So people can go and have a look at that now.
That's some of the non-glamorous parts of fieldwork that maybe are lesser talked about, huh?
Yeah.
The combing through sheep fields part. But it's also really nice that these are the kind of samples that, can be found by the public, or, by somebody who's not necessarily a geologist and are just out there and kind of waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, somebody's asked why there aren't more recent meteorites from Mars. And I guess this question kind of can maybe be taken 2 ways. Maybe why are there not more recent geological samples that are coming from Mars, but also what affects the timing of meteorites falling to Earth, and how does that work?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it's actually something that my boss at Glasgow is studying at the moment, because certainly with the type of meteorite that is Winchcombe, so that's carbonaceous chondrites, there does seem to be a cycle where every 10 years, or is it 30 years, I've forgotten, but there's a cycle of a couple of decades, we get a flurry of falls that are reported, and then it's kind of quiet. And that would kind of suggest that maybe there's some kind of broken up asteroid that is near Earth that we can't see because it's maybe quite small, or it's a rubble field that comes close to Earth. every 30 years or so, and then bits are more likely to fall to Earth. With Mars, there hasn't been any kind of cycle of Martian falls. It's just the case that people have studied why there are not more meteorites found now than there were when there were only less than 1 billion people on the Earth. You would think there's more people, there's more cameras looking at the sky. Why are there not more meteorites found recently or seen to fall recently than way back when? I think the answer is that people are indoor people now. People used to be outside every night, looking at the sky because there was no Netflix. So there was nothing else to look at. But there hasn't been an increase in fall sightings. They are very difficult to find. You need to have more than one person see it so that you can kind of triangulate the direction that it was going, where it fell. Obviously, most of the Earth is ocean. So we do have a camera network in the UK that looks at the sky. And that's partially how we found Winchcombe, is because we triangulated that fireball that was seen and we pinpointed down to that small area. But we have had some near misses where it's gone in the North Sea, or it's fallen somewhere in Sweden, maybe. If it falls anywhere like Scotland, if it falls in the summer over England, you are very, very unlikely to find it, because any amount of grass, even grass that's sort of ankle height, you'll never find a meteorite in there unless it's a huge one that's made a big crater. They don't make big craters. They tend just to plop on the ground and sit there, and they just look like any other rock. So unless you physically see it fall, it's really difficult to find them.
Something, I guess, that makes something that's already quite rare feel even rarer when you get your hands on that little piece that you get to put in your mass spectrometer.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I said to Luke when we found that meteorite, this is the highlight of our career, and it's all downhill from here.
So I've got a question here from Irene, who wants to know, obviously we have meteorites that fall to Earth from lots of different planets, Mars being one, but are there meteorites of Earth and other planets on other bodies in the solar system? So do other planets also get meteorites?
Yes, absolutely. So that is something that is really highly sought after, is a meteorite of Earth that we can find on the moon, because Earth has plate tectonics, so the crust is being recycled all the time. And what that means is that we don't have rocks from Earth's earliest history. So in terms of us figuring out the early history of Earth, we don't have any geological record. But there could potentially be a meteorite, an Earth meteorite, present on the moon somewhere that was blasted to the moon, 4 billion years ago, and has just been sitting there. There's no weathering on the moon. It's just going to be perfectly preserved in this vacuum atmosphere. But nobody's found it yet. But that would be a really exciting find when we do find that.
Okay, that's exciting. So maybe Irene could be the person who could be the scientist who could find that and study that really unique sample as well. I think we've probably got time for one last question. It's about how scientists such as yourself can tell the difference between life that originated on Mars, or organic molecules that originated on Mars, and those that might have been brought by us. And I think you touched a little bit on that when you were showing us one of your plots. I mean, you have lots of kind of samples that you run through the machine to show you what an Earth version might be. But could you tell us a little bit about how you, I guess, confirm that the life or the organic molecules that you're picking up from these samples are definitely not just ones that we've put there in the first place?
Yeah, that is also a really good question. So for the Mars sample returns, the probe that is sent up, everything is sterilized to the highest degree before it's sent there, to make sure that we don't contaminate Mars with Earth life, because obviously we don't want to wipe out anything that could potentially be present there. We don't want to confuse ourselves by detecting Earth life just because it's come back from Mars, but we took it there in the first place. That's something that NASA and all of the space agencies are really, really careful about. In terms of meteorites, it is more difficult because they have got terrestrial contamination in them. But there are things you can do to separate out the terrestrial molecules from the Martian molecules. one of the best ways of doing that is to look at hydrogen, different types of hydrogen that are present in those hydrocarbon molecules. So on Mars, the hydrogen is heavier. Most of the hydrogen has a heavier mass, so its atom is actually heavier. So you can analyze that in the labs here on Earth, and you can look at the hydrogens that are attached to each one of those carbon molecules, and you can say that molecule is Martian because it has heavy hydrogen, that molecule is terrestrial because it has light hydrogen, as we would expect on Earth. Unfortunately, the instrument that does that is, the size of a room. It requires huge power sources, huge big magnets. You would never be able to do that with a rover currently. So the Curiosity rover can't tell us whether it's just looking at contamination that it's brought itself. We're pretty sure it's not, because they're all tested, any rubber that's attached to them, they're all tested for what molecules are present in there. And so they know the record of all the molecules that they're likely to detect that are on the rover. But yeah, in terms of meteorites, it needs to be this hydrogen study, which is something that we are working on. That's the next stage of our analysis, to pick out which ones are definitely Martian and which ones are definitely terrestrial molecules.
Well, that's really exciting that somebody had the foresight to, predict actually where the research is going, as well as ask some questions about some of the older stuff. Thank you so much, Lydia. This has been absolutely fantastic. I see in our Q&A actually somebody's just asked if a recording will be available, and it will. So if anybody didn't catch the beginning or you want to watch again, it'll be available on our YouTube as soon as this is over. So you can catch up anytime, you can watch again, and you can share this lecture. Thanks so much, Lydia.
No problem. This was fun.
And I hope maybe we can see you all again next time for our next public lecture. So thanks and goodbye.